Welcome to Smart Architectural Programming. Mastering Python Dictionaries, Exploring the .get Method, Free Code Camp Advanced Tutorial.
If you look at your screen, basically, this example exemplifies how providing a default value to the .get method would help us in further in ways which we could not imagine with the other notation. So we know that we get a none value when there's no key when we ask .get method to get information for a key and that key does not exist, and a key error pops up, we get a none value out of the .get method. But imagine if you can define a value if that particular key does not exist. This would help you in not just avoiding error, but also making sure that your program is more systematic in its process, and you can gather data and intelligence if certain value does not exist, because you're trying to store data with dictionaries. So if that data does not exist within dictionary, you can record that instead of not only not posing a problem, but also helping you understand if you have a certain data point or not. So in this case, if you notice on line 4, I'm not going to over the dictionary we created because that's pretty much self-explanatory on line 2. But on line 5, you'll notice we're trying to get the subject major that a student might be studying under, and we use the .get method and major. A major key does not exist in the dictionary that's defined above. So in the second argument, we give it a default value. So what it means is, if the .get method does not find the major key in the Python dictionary, then the value that the method needs to return is undeclared. So when we print major variable, instead of it showing us none, it shows us something that means something, which is undeclared, right? So that is the significance of using default values in the .get method when dealing with dictionaries in Python. Similarly, we try to save the grade of the student in a grade variable where the grade key does not exist. So we again give it a default value in strings of not available. So when we print it, instead of it printing none, it prints not available. Again, the significance of it is that it's providing us some level of intelligence, right, regarding the data, instead of just showing us none. So the default value is an essential aspect to understand if you want to use the .get method effectively as a programmer. The third example that we're going to be dealing with is going to help us understand how the .get method handles missing keys. So if you go to the third example here, you'll notice that we've defined a dictionary that I talked about right at the start, right? Then I had to go back to example 1, is that there's a preferences dictionary which defines a theme, which key which has a dark value, and a language key which defines Python as the value. So if we use the .get value for a key that does not exist here, and we set up a default value of 12 pixels, we get that as we get the font size as 12 pixels. So, all right. So if you look at this code in particular, you'll understand that this code in particular refers to a case most users would have when you're dealing with an application, or what would be behind an application when you're trying to access that application. An application, when you create an account, stores your preferences when you change the settings of the size, the theme, the dark mode or the white mode, so on and so forth. And those preferences are stored as a form of data point in some way, in most cases as a dictionary. So when you log into your account, your saved preferences are read from that dictionary and applied to your user interface. So let's suppose that you didn't save any preferences. You only saved the theme preference and the language preference, which is Python. And software is very, you could say, systematic and systematic in its approach. That is, that it's getting values of the different user interface aspects that you see, and in those values, it realized I don't know what the font size you prefer is. So if you have preferred a font size, let me go back and check if that font size is available, right? So it on line 5, you'll see it creates a variable called font size and checks within the preferences dictionary data point, try to get your font size. At the same time, if you haven't stored your font size, it can't just say none, which means you can't see anything on your screen. You'll just the interface with no text, nothing there, right? Because it's running the none value. So to safeguard against the fact that you might not have saved the font value preference, the code base would create a default value, as we talked about the default value earlier, right? A default value to make sure that regardless if there is a preference, they'll put the font size as your preference. But if there's not a preference, the font size is still there and the font still shows up on your screen. So that is 12 pixels. And the font size, when we print that, we get the font size and so on and so forth. Now, the key aspect to understand here is that we talked about default values in the previous example. But here we can understand in particular how missing keys might create massive problems in an application. This is just one example of an account in a website or a platform or application that you may be dealing with. And this is a very, very common application. And if a value is missing, and let alone the program crashing because you did not use the .get method and use some other value to get these values, and when you didn't find that value, key error popped up and your entire program stopped functioning. Supposedly we know better and we didn't do that, right? And we use the .get method. If you use the .get method, you get a none value, right? And that creates another layer, another logical, like not a syntactical or a code-based error, but a logical error in your code. How do you deal with that? This is how you deal with that, like creating default values to make sure there is something to fall back on for the code to work as expected, right? This is why the .get method has such a high importance when you're dealing with getting values from a Python dictionary. I think that's the more important aspect of what we need to discuss in the .get method. Before we sign off from this video, George, would you like to add anything at the end?
Nope, I think you covered it.
And we'll see you on our next video.